Thank you very much to Pam Damoff, MP for Oakville, North Burlington, for joining us today to uh, discuss a timely but I guess ultimately sad state of affair in our nation's public discourse. Your decision to step away from politics is in light of, I think we can all say, just the nastiness that has been commonplace in our national dialogue that's been going on. Um, for our listeners listening, can you maybe just enlighten us? How did you come to this decision? Because I can't imagine that this was a light one, and I don't think this was one that was done on a whim. So just maybe let us into your thought process to how ultimately did you come to this decision for yourself?
Well, first, thanks for having me on the 905er podcast. I really appreciate it. Um, I think it's the tone of the way people are interacting with politicians, and it's not just me, has really changed since I first got elected in 2010 on Oakville Council and then 2015 federally. So it's changed. And, having been someone that worked on firearms legislation, I've often had the gun lobby mad at me. But it tended to be the online email type thing. It was when it transferred over to in person and in person in my riding, in our riding of Oakville, North Burlington. So I think that was when it really made me uncomfortable. I was out grocery shopping and had someone start yelling at me in the grocery store with, expletives, F Trudeau, that kind of thing. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm out getting groceries. Like, this is not an appropriate thing to do. And at a chamber event, when someone was quite threatening in the way they spoke to me, never expected it at a business event, right? I didn't really, that was last summer. And so, sort of a number of these things, and seeing the way that people interacted and felt that it was okay to be abusive to me personally when I was at home. And I just started sort of looking over my shoulder all the time when I was going out and not going to things when I knew it was going to be quite a public event or being nervous about it. Now, am I worried that I'm going to get it just became something that was uncomfortable and not healthy to always be looking over your shoulder when you're out in public.
Now there are going to be, I'll call them naysayers, critics of your decision, and especially critics of your government and of your party, who are saying, well, that's just public life. That you decided to run for politics, you decided to run for public life. This is part of the game. Suck it up and deal with it if you're not willing to put up with the criticism of the public. Because it's my democratic right. I can be critical of you and your government. So suck it up and deal with it. I'll give you the microphone to say what do you have to say to those people who are listening right now to this podcast?
So they're not criticizing the government, though. It's personal. And when I'm threatened with rape, or it's too bad your babies weren't barbecued. That's what you wanted, when
Really?
talking about abortion. Yeah. Some of them much worse. And so it has nothing to do with policy. And my male colleagues have told me that when they get criticized, it's usually on policy, it's not personal. One of my colleagues was telling me this week, since I came out, a number of people have been talking to me that his wife has been threatened with rape. So they have sent her emails. So, when people say to me, the gun lobby has posted quite a bit since I announced, and they called me a cry bully. Um, to which just prompts all of their followers to jump on and send emails. And but this isn't what they called mean tweets. And yes, you do need a thick skin to be in politics, and I have no problem with people disagreeing with policy. I think it's important that we have differences of opinions, but we can't have those conversations anymore. And I think that's what's changed, is being right now, it seems to be, if you don't agree with me, you're my enemy and you should be thrown into jail.
I
So,
I mean, absolutely, that seems to be the way sort of discourse has gone in the last decade or so. Do you think uh, Well, first of all, let's address the gender part of this because that's obviously a big part. And uh, you know, do you think that that you're the tip of the iceberg to an extent, and that good uh, female politicians are basically being driven out of politics, regardless of party, because of the constant kind of tidal waves of extreme hostility. I mean, like the kind of violent, misogynist stuff that you've seen. I mean, do you think there are other people like you who are basically saying this isn't worth it? You may say that MPs have a good pension, but this still ain't worth it.
Yeah, and I mean some people it actually they want to dig their heels in and stay to, fight the good fight, and I give them lots of credit for that. And um, I do think you look at someone like Catherine McKenna, who left for very much the same reason. Um, and it has nothing to do with political party, to be honest with you. It's not just Liberal MPs that are targeted. I know Michelle Rempel was threatened out in Calgary when she was out for dinner. She has faced it. I was talking to Charlie Angus, who was telling me about, his family being targeted. It's not a political party. I think though that we need to be calling it out when we see it, and much to the, well, you're in politics, you just need to tough it out. I think the vast majority of Canadians aren't like this. I firmly believe that. But I know that many people are afraid to say something because they're afraid they'll be targeted. And I can give you an example. I had a number of meetings when we were looking for witnesses on Bill C-21, which is the firearms legislation. And it was predominantly women who I met with, and I said, would you come to the committee to tell us your story? And they said, no, I'm going to be a target. I don't want to speak publicly about it. So you're silencing voices because of intimidation and bullying. And I think we as Canadians need to start speaking up and saying, you know what, you may not like her government's policy, but this isn't personal, and actually calling out people that are doing it.
I mean, I remember a decade or so ago, back when Dalton McGuinty was premier of in Ontario, and he made the point, which I thought was a good one, that um, Coca-Cola doesn't spend its days telling you that Pepsi is going to poison you. They just say that Coca-Cola is better. We've spent decades as I say we, I'm not a politician, but I tried. But people in politics have spent decades saying not only that the other guys are not as good, but that they are actively bad. In effect, kind of implying in all kinds of ways that they are evil, often implying that they are acting illegally. Is this something that we those of us who've been involved in politics in whatever way have kind of have created? I mean, I don't want to suggest for a minute victim blaming here, but did we unleash this monster?
To some extent, yes. But I think the tone of how we've talked about other politicians has changed, Roland. I don't, um, you know, I like that analogy that Dalton used. I have found in our community the people who generally the people who've run against me. I mean, and when I first got elected in 2015, Effie Triantafilopoulos was always gracious, and it was never about her personally or me personally. It was always about the policies that we were running on, and I won. But she won provincially. We've had a great relationship, and we've worked together on Kira's law, actually provincially. So I do think that I don't think it serves people well just to call other politicians criminals, and that they deserve to be in jail, that they're evil. It's the you can disagree with the policy and say, the conservatives will cancel childcare, for example, and you need to think about if that's the kind of Canada that you want to live in. but and I'm not saying that we're not guilty of it as well in the Liberal Party. I don't think any party is blameless in this. I have seen a shift though since Pierre Poilievre got elected, that it's the norm, and the disrespect for our institutions, so disrespect for mainstream media, for Parliament itself. Committee used to be a place where we collaborated, and we would actually work together. I used to say I wish they would take school classrooms when they come to Ottawa to a committee meeting and not question period, because then they'd actually see the way most of it works. But it's now deliberately trying to disrupt committees and bring the it's about getting social media clips now. So when in committee, when the Conservatives are talking, they're not talking to the witness or to across the table to us. They're looking at the camera, and it's about getting that clip they can post on social media to rage farm, to fundraise. Whereas it used to be that we could work together in committee. So I've seen a significant decline in sort of the respect for our institutions since Pierre Poilievre was elected.
And
What does
is he reflecting the basically reflecting? This is a global problem. We think that there have been 2 MPs murdered in Britain in the last 5 years, no more than 5 years certainly, which is something that hadn't happened since the 1800s, I think. Obviously, that US, we all know about the US, but just that, and you were speaking. This isn't just about unpleasant social media comments that cross a line. I mean, I understood from what you're saying, like you literally began to fear going to events. I mean, you do not have a whole lot of security as an MP. Generally, I would imagine
Well, you
none,
don't
in
have any
fact. Yeah, I was going to
most
say
of the
none.
time.
Yeah.
That has changed though, and it's also a sad reflection of society that Parliamentary Protective Services now has given us a panic button. Our offices are closed to the public except by appointment. So the door's locked. There's security systems. This is for all MPs. We get notices, there's a protest Friday. Please ensure that you maintain security protocols. And I can hire security for events, which I did last year for Canada Day, for example. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't have any kind of protection when I go out to places. And it's not so much when I'm at events, it's going there, or when I'm out grocery shopping or going to the gym or out for a walk, right? Where you're constantly kind of looking over your shoulder.
um I'm kind of want to double down on this topic that or this aspect of this discussion we're talking about, because as you said, the F Trudeau flags that we see that are so ubiquitous across the entire country. I mean, it's an industry of just like, let's just antagonize each other to the point that we're going to wave these flags. And like is I think we've seen in the United States just how far divided they've become. I really don't know how they're going to bridge that gap. And my concern is we're letting that infiltrate our politics here in Canada. That, as you said, if you're an MP, you may not like what you said, but we that's why we have elections. I disagree with you. I vote you out. Somebody else comes in, changes course. Why are This might be an unfair question to ask you, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Why are we getting to this point? Like, why can we just not see that I have a difference of opinion, you have a difference of opinion? It's entirely a good and evil argument, and there's facts just don't matter in these arguments anymore. It's just you're evil because a Facebook meme says you're evil, therefore you are. How,
Well,
what's your opinion on that?
I've seen a difference since the pandemic. So, a couple of people have said to me, is it because of what's happened with Donald Trump in the US? And I think we did start to see a change where people were saying the nasty stuff out loud after he got elected. I think the pandemic has really been more traumatizing for people than we acknowledge. People weren't able to work. Some people lost their jobs. They were shut in their homes with only the internet to deal with. And the decline in um, sort of more mainstream media. I mean, if you look locally, we don't even have a newspaper anymore in Halton Region, right? It's digital. There's like some digital you know, no offense to podcasts or digital media, I think they're great, and but we we just don't have the same kind of trusted accountability that used to be there. So anybody can just put out anything, and I will talk to people and I'll say it's just not true. Well, I saw it on Facebook, and but since the pandemic, I've seen an incredible shift, and I've met with a number of times with a paramedic from Saskatoon who was working on a private member's bill about assault on healthcare workers and public safety officers. You know, paramedics are being assaulted, nurses in emergency rooms. The level of rage that seems to be out there, not just towards politicians, it really has ramped up since the pandemic.
Someone was mentioning to me last week, and I've certainly noticed this as well, that any kind of public facing institution, whether it's a government institution, somewhere where people come into contact with, and in my case, I can think of the pharmacy just down the road. I mean, there's a pharmacy as a business. They will have signs saying we will not tolerate abusive behavior. Well, that's not something we ever used to have to say. And it speaks to, I think, a general just loss of trust in each other. And I've certainly heard other people say that, yeah, that for whatever reason, COVID seems to have been a kind of watershed in changing, in bringing just the worst kind of behavior forward.
I just wanted to add on to that especially since COVID, I mean, let's be honest, since the convoy, it comes down to what happened in Ottawa with the convoy. I think it's kind of been a focal point for a lot of people's anger and a tipping point to kind of which side of this debate you're on, as far as I can tell in the public discourse. But what does it say that we have, I'm going to be honest, but you can be partisan here, like a political party that seems to be actively courting this disruption, this anger, and it's not a question of, okay, well, here are the facts and let's be critical of the Trudeau government, and Lord knows there is plenty to be critical of. You have 10 years of power underneath your belt there. There's plenty to be chipped away at. But to come in and just say, I'm going to throw gasoline on this fire. I want to nurture this, and I want to. It's not even a matter of I reluctantly accept that it's there. It's I want to throw fire on it. I want to burn. I want to that anger that I want to burn everything down. How? What does that? Where does that leave us as a country? That an entire political party that is leading in the polls is now kind of encouraging this misogyny, this racism, because they're not stopping it. They're not toning it back, saying, "Hey, everybody, like, keep it under control here."
But you know what? I think they would tone it back if Canadians stood up and say, we really don't like it. I mean, I noticed last week on Tuesday when Polyev got thrown out of the House for not respecting the Speaker's decision. And then, you know, they were all out in the foyer doing their Facebook Lives, and I don't know whether it didn't play well in their polling or what happened, but the next day, it was completely different in the House. He was calm, and the caucus was not heckling. And I don't think that behavior last Tuesday, I don't think that sat well with the majority of Canadians to see, you know, a political party acting like school children and thinking that it was okay. So they are actively courting that rage. There's no doubt about it. But there's a lot of really good people out there that don't like that behavior. And like I said, Steve Paikin had a really good article yesterday
I was going to
about.
bring this up too. Go ahead.
Did you see it?
I read it just before we came on here because I wanted to refresh.
Yeah.
You go ahead.
No, I was just going to say about, you know, someone that was called out bad behavior on the subway and then ended up being beaten up. But it sort of speaks to calling out this kind of outrageous behavior, and nobody wants to do that and then be assaulted. I you know, don't get me wrong, but you know, it used to be that we wouldn't call out and sometimes we still don't, but when women are harassed in public, and we really need other people around to sort of step up and go, whoa, 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 that's not appropriate. That's crossing the line. And I think there's a bit of fear involved and intimidation, but I think if enough of us do it, I am happy that my statement has sort of provoked a dialogue on it amongst a number of people, and I'm really happy if some good can come out of it. That would make me really happy.
What does it what does it tell you though? I mean, if we're going to look at this national dialogue that we're engaging in, that polling numbers show that people want Pierre Poilievre and presumably his style of politics to take the reins of the country. What what do you take away from that going forward?
Well, do they want him or do they not want us? Yeah, do you know
That
what I mean? Like it, but
I've been trying to figure that
also,
out for the last 3 years. So
you know, I have been in that 338 Canada. Every election I've run, I'm supposed to lose. You know, the polls were that it was going to be conservative. Things most people, to be really honest with you right now, are not following the minutia of politics. They're taking their kids to soccer. They're worried about their mortgage coming due in the fall. They're looking at the price of groceries. They're planning maybe their summer holiday. Like they're living their lives, right? And they don't really pay attention to everything that's going on until an election campaign happens. So I've always said to my team, like, just ignore the polls because we're going to keep our head in the boat. We're just going to keep, doing what we need to do, and what happens, happens. So I'm not someone that puts a lot of stock in polls, but I think it's harder to do polling now, to be honest, Joel, too. How many people have phones? How are you reaching only a certain demographic? Because you've seen so often where, traditional polling has been like way off the mark come election time.
I
I don't believe in my heart that Canadians are nasty people. I believe they're good, and I think we need to be speaking in a more positive way to show people that it is possible to be positive.
I guess I'm concerned. I don't buy the polls are as stark as they say. I agree. I think there's a little bit more nuance in there, but I do agree. I do think there's an anger in the population, a general anger. Things are going tough for a lot of people, and you're the people in control in the seats of power. You're going to get the brunt of that anger. That's just politics. And I understand Pierre Poilievre wanting to capitalize on that. You do the same thing if the tables were reversed. Absolutely. My worry is his stoking the anger, his nurturing it, his embracing it. He's saying everything that you're feeling and that you're saying is a-okay, and you should be doing more of it. The problems facing this country are far more complex than just simply axing the tax or building the homes or whatnot. Nuance is required, and I'm sure you're aware of that. We're not going to get into all the minutiae there, but it's not that simple. And I'm worried if he does become prime minister and he can't deliver on these things within 1 year, what happens to that anger? That anger has to go somewhere, and I don't believe it's just going to go off into the ether. Um, I would say, am I being hyperbolic on this? Am I just being worried Nancy on this? It's a genuine fear I have is
No,
that
it's ending friendships between people,
Mhm.
right? The different issues that are happening in the world right now are so polarizing that people are losing lifetime friends because of a difference of opinion over the war in the Middle East right now, what's happening in Gaza, and so it's. No, I share your concern about the. Someone said to me that the pandemic changed how people deal with trauma. And so whether it's the trauma of what's happening with your health, whether it's what's happening in a war and over across the ocean, but the way we deal with trauma has changed, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. That people are really struggling on how to deal with really tough situations. So I agree with you.
I mean, you obviously you went into Parliament in 2015 as part of the new Trudeau government at that time, and the sort of sweeping changes in MPs. So I mean, basically, you just when by the time you leave, it will be a full 10 years, which is a pretty good political career for many people. They would consider that, you get in, you win again. That's impressive. But do you feel a sense of any disappointment that you would be, in essence, kind of forced out in this way? Do you feel that you've been kind of forced out of politics against your will, and that in a more perfect world, you'd be staying there?
I would be staying. But having said that, I'm really, really proud of what I've been able to do as an MP. Things that, um, don't necessarily make headlines, but funding for the Terry Fox Research Institute to create the Marathon of Hope Cancer Centers, I know for a fact that wouldn't have happened without me. I was a backbench MP and I spent 3 years working on it. And when Bill Morneau announced it in the budget, all the heads behind the finance minister turned and looked at me and started clapping and seeing me crying in the background. But the same with funding for, the Canadian medical isotope ecosystem. That was something that I worked on. I'm really proud of stuff I personally have worked on. I'm also proud of some of the government stuff that we've done, and I'm really at peace with my decision. This is just some people are energized by, taking on the fight, and I am energized by taking on a fight. Don't get me wrong. I've been dealing with the gun lobby since 2017, so it's not that I'm afraid of that. It's just I've never been an overly partisan person, and this is just I'm not comfortable in it. So I just feel like it's the right time to say and recognizing in myself this isn't the type of atmosphere that I want to work in, and I'm going to take the accomplishments of the last 10 years and be very proud of them and move on.
I was going to say, I mean, it's in the email you sent out to constituents. I mean, obviously, as an MP or an MPP, you kind of have to be your own. Sometimes people politicians brag all the time. It's like, well, if they don't, no one else is gonna. So, but you mentioned the various accomplishments you have, and you say, often working as a backbench MP ain't easy to get things done. You're fighting within your own party quite often to get attention and to get sort of onto that priority list. But do you think obviously you have a career ahead of you after politics? Do you think that there's a place for someone like yourself, perhaps with someone like Catherine McKenna, perhaps with someone from another party or another avenue of politics, who feels the same way, to kind of say, like, we need to sort of build some kind of movement here that in a completely non-partisan way takes all the parties to task when they encourage those lines to be crossed. Now, like you say, ultimately, if someone is vile on the internet, that's not the party's fault. That's the vile person's fault. So I don't want to, imply that it's. But you do have, the politicians have that platform to make change, and you can make change simply by the way you behave and act as an example to others. Do you think there could be some kind of, movement of like fighting back against this? Because
I've
I don't
actually
see how
thought
it's
of
going to
that,
happen.
Roland. Yeah, I've thought of that because, I have had people from other parties reach out to me, and Catherine McKenna reached out to me. Kathleen Wynne is another one who was subject, at the provincial level, the hatred of her was not around policy. It's so viscerally personal. But there's some really good conservatives across the aisle too. Karen Vecchio is a friend of mine. She's an MP from the London area who chaired the Status of Women Committee. It has a conservative chair since 2017, and she got yanked from that committee as chair recently. And she hasn't spoken out publicly. I would love it if people like her would, because she we may disagree on some things, but we work really, really well together. And she's been removed, in my opinion, because she is a reasonable progressive conservative, and isn't. So I think there is an opportunity for some of us to sort of come together. It is something that I've been thinking about.
I personally would love to see something like that.
What if,
You know, when we started this podcast, we kind of made a decision to try and be reasonable. We are progressive people. People know our history. We have been involved in politics, and we weren't conservatives. There's no secret there. However, we honestly try to be fair to everybody, even when our own opinions are, and we are willing to be challenged. You know, the trouble is we can't get people to challenge us from the right. And it's like, come on, argue against us. We're happy to hear it. Silence, you know, that's another story. But um, the easy thing, you know, we know that this podcast would be more popular if we would just went out there and said outrageous things, and if we were more hurtful about people, and if we just lied, we'll get more listeners. But we made a decision not to do that. It's probably, you know, we're never going to be rich doing this podcast. But we need kind of more people to do that, to say, well, there's something, you know, particularly that kind of the Canadian self-identity for so long was like, we're reasonable, we're moderate, we welcome everybody, we don't just scream at each other. It seems like something, you know, something needs to happen. I know that's a really sort of lame statement, but I don't know. What do you think about that very vague and waffly statement?
No. You're absolutely right. And also, you know, even on with social media, the algorithms now amplify the anger, and you don't get the same kind of amplification when it's not angry type. So, you know, kudos to you both for treating your podcast the way that you do, because I think it's really important. Just keep on doing it, you know.
well, thank you very much for the kind words. I think Roland and I probably have 101 million other questions to ask of you about everything, but I do know you have to go because the house is calling. So, MP Pam Damoff, thank you very much for joining us today. We wish you all the best and the best of luck in wherever you decide to go next in your career. All the best to you, and thank you for representing the people of Oakville, North Burlington for the 10 years that you did.
Thanks so much to both of you.
Thank you.